that one represent. Go ahead, Margaret.
All right, so this is the June 16th, 2025 HR committee meeting. It's starting at 5:30 p.m. Dan Voltner will be attending today, but he's going to be showing up a little late. If we could, I'll stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance first, if everybody's good with that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so the first thing up is the consent agenda for and hiring process for certified staff.
So we have a handout with the names of the certified staff that have been hired since the last meeting or have tentative offers extended to them on behalf of the board. We did have a couple of staff resignations. I would point out that this consent agenda includes the principal of the high school, but as all of you were notified earlier today, and this will be on the June 23rd board meeting, Principal Mark Getz from Leap in Lebanon. Leap in Lebanon and Lincoln STEM Elementary Schools has also resigned effective June. So that will be one change that we already know will be on the June 23rd consent agenda. We've had a few resignations that happened with certified staff since the last time we met. And then a number of certified staff hires, potential hires that have been extended tentative offers for contracts beginning in 25-26. Many of these, in recognition of our financial situation, are 1 year or what LTE contracts where they will be working for us full-time, eligible for contract pay and benefits, but that have no expectation of renewal in 26-27. So that's what, when you see the designation 1 year, that's what the 1 year designation is. Others, we felt that we were sure enough about their continued employment that they'll be issued contracts that are considered regular contracts, which means that if they weren't continued in 26-27, we would go through a non-renewal process similar to what we had gone through earlier this spring for those of you that had been around for that process. So we do have the hiring process for certified staff on deck as a later topic of discussion. So I don't know if you want to proceed with recommending that this consent agenda be forwarded to the board for approval as a resolution, or if you want to hold off on that until we have completed the discussion related to hiring processes for administrators and certified staff, which is later in the discussion. So okay, I defer to you as the chair.
Unless I hear anybody suggest otherwise, I don't see a problem with moving it forward to, unless any specific board member feels like there needs to be a closed meeting about any of the individuals noted on the documents.
I guess the question I just have, and it's just a question, is kind of where we're at, and I don't know if that's what we're covering in E regarding current policy versus maybe what the ambition is regarding that, because I know at the full board meeting in May, we had 3 individual certified staff that we went through and individually reviewed each of their contract. With this, it's a full consent agenda, so it doesn't seem to just align with the process we used last meeting. So just seeking to understand where we're at.
So my understanding is tonight we're going to be discussing how the board wants to move forward in the future for all certified staff members, and that would be discussed on E. So I have no problem holding off on this consent agenda until the full committee discussion in E. But there is no standard practice built yet, we'll say. The board still needs to discuss how they would like to move forward in the future, involving themselves with hiring administrators and certified staff employees.
So there's no existing policy for how we hire certified staff? I was
My,
trying to look back through policy and obviously there are a lot that could be associated with the process.
my understanding is historically, and Craig, please correct me if I'm wrong, is historically the board was not really engaged at all in hiring or
Administrators.
yes, it was just, we would take the recommendation of administration and move forward that way. Now, Craig would be able to speak on if it, in the past, they did, have closed sessions on occasion. I'm not sure. Craig?
Yeah, I think as a matter of making sure that we're closing the loop completely, that's hopefully where the discussion comes in. Where, in the past, if the staff brought a recommendation to the board, it can sometimes look very clunky because, that recommendation also implies an approval. So if the board doesn't feel like that's an approval worth moving, that the board would feel comfortable with, whether it fits the within the process or whatnot, then the board would probably decide, hey, listen, we want to explore. I'm not articulating this well, sorry. When approval is sought of the board does have that authority to say no, essentially. So instead of having the administration get a no, maybe we can come together with a particular process that would be mutually beneficial. And I guess that would be the intention moving forward.
Just didn't know if there was a current administrative guideline or policy in place as to the process, because when I tried to look, I mean, obviously. For those of you who are newer, maybe you can identify, it's like, which of them are Neola that might be passed as part of this book, what are currently in place as Watertown policies, so just seeking clarification. To understand more than anything else.
Margaret, can you speak on that at all from an administrative guideline
I can.
standpoint?
There is no administrative guideline that has been documented for the district. I mean, I can speak to the practice, which has been that the consent agenda has been previewed by the HR committee for review. There would be occasional general questions, but most cases, the consent agenda was recommended for approval to be forwarded to, as a resolution, to the next week's board meeting. If there were questions about individual candidates, those of course would have to be discussed in closed session, and that was a relatively rare occurrence. So, I mean, that has been the usual practice. I mean, from an internal operating standpoint, we have a process that is well established and used consistently by all of our hiring administrators, but I can't say that there is a documented administrative guideline. So the Neola policies come with administrative guidelines. That's not something that we've had in the past. We've had a rather generalized book of policy, as I'm sure you've noted. And so that has been the practice. It's been consistently used, but if there was a board member who had a concern about somebody, then that would be pulled off of the agenda and then forwarded to a closed session discussion meeting for the entire board, the following Monday.
So the process would be to contact you then, and then it becomes part of the HR agenda first, and then the full board agenda generally. I'm sorry to be so.
Yeah, well, we have
not.
not ever gone into closed session to discuss individual hires.
Okay.
In the HR committee. That has been, like, that would be pulled out of the consent agenda, like a board member would say, well, I'll approve the consent agenda with the exception of whoever, and I would like that hire to be placed on a closed session agenda item for the entire board.
Okay, thank you for the clarification,
Yeah,
and thank you
yeah.
everyone for
Mhm.
entertaining the conversation.
Yeah, if I may, it's current policy 4113. It says all All of the district's recruitment, selection, and hiring practices and procedures are subject to and guided by the district's commitment to non-discrimination and equal opportunity employment as further identified in related board policies. The primary goals of these processes shall be to attract, identify a diverse range of highly qualified candidates who, if hired, will demonstrate a high degree of commitment to the district's mission, district's goals, and their assigned duties and responsibilities, and who will also make positive personal and professional contributions to the district. The recruitment and the hiring for all positions of employment in the district, except for the position of superintendent, shall be conducted in accordance with the provisions of this policy. The superintendent shall ensure that the district's practices, procedures surrounding recruitment, selection, and hiring are well-defined and implemented consistently. Different practices and procedures may be defined for different types of positions. The board will make the final decision to approve or not approve the hiring of any employee. Any preliminary offer of employment or any offer of a contract shall be contingent on obtaining board approval. The superintendent determines if there is an urgent need to fill a position or that another exceptional and good cause exists. Standard practices may be modified for all potential candidates by shortening the standard application period, eliminating multiple interview levels, or consisting in interim appointments. However, under no circumstances shall an employee be hired without: 1, participating in an interview; 2, completing a physical examination with satisfactory results; 3, for the positions either of the following: the district has completed licensure reference, and so on. So basically, it's a broad policy, but it also states that the board will make the final decision to approve or not approve in the hiring of any employee. So, perhaps there has been a practice, of accepting, recommendations from the administration. However, that does not preclude the board from, stepping in and intervening when they see, a desired result differently than the administrative recommendation.
No, absolutely. Like you said, just wanting to understand that because I'm a very risk averse individual. So as someone who sits here, I just want to make sure that we're consistent in how we're enforcing the policy so that it's not setting up the district for any liability. So that's all.
Sure.
So have we adopted that policy?
This is our current policy.
Okay,
Right now, we're in the process of making adjustments to that policy. So I guess I'll ask, Carl and Dan. Do you want to hold off with putting the consent agendas forward for resolution until after our discussion on how we're gonna move forward?
I'd say yes.
Okay,
Makes no difference.
okay, we'll hold off with that
And then
for A and B, correct?
for the consent agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a complimentary document which references the support staff that have been extended offers and been hired under the superintendent's direction for, most of these are summer appointments or potential appointments for fall. I'll just say that these folks have already started and are working as, for the most part, lawn and summer cleaners in our various buildings. And so those do not in general go to the board any longer. They go to HR committee and then are issued notices of employment, which was a board decision board and HR decision that was made a few months back regarding the content of the consent agenda.
Yes, I recall that we weren't gonna get involved with non-certified
With
staff.
support staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all I have on that topic.
Okay. So then we're at the USI update and planning health
Well,
insurance.
Sorry, we're at the summer school.
Oh, okay.
Just as, just a note on the summer school. So these are the latest and probably the last group of summer school hires that you'll see coming through for this summer, absent any unusual or unexpected resignations or things like that. We do hold off on, committing to hire special ed paraprofessionals until we know what the caseload is and what the needs will be for those individual students that are enrolled in summer school. So that's why you see a whole list of them, whereas you saw bigger lists earlier in spring related to other summer school assignments. But that's a needs-based hiring, and it's too early in March and April and May to know what our needs are going to be with this particular set of employees. So that's the summer school agenda. So now we're on.
Okay. All right, so now we're on CUSI update and planning for health insurance.
So I'd like to introduce all of you who have not met him, Al Yeager, who is our USI benefits advisor and benefits broker. He is here to do a presentation for you related to the USI kind of a status report on where we are at with respect to the performance of our health and dental insurance plans. I will get that. That presentation had been shared earlier this week with all of you and in the administrative content section, and I'll pull it up on the board here in a minute so that you can all see.
Margaret, I can certainly speak to it while you're doing that.
You can go ahead, Al.
All right, well, I appreciate the discussion and opportunity. In the end, the presentation that you had already been shared with you, it speaks to, first and foremost, it's not just me that is the independent advisor that the district hired. You'll see on the first slide, a whole team page that we have. And that team page represents individuals that not only are service, but as well as compliance for the sake of benefits, but also actuaries, behavioral health, the benefit. You go down the list, the contractual for pharmacy contracting, contracts for provider contracting. And my point to all that is we have a lot of individuals that when we are negotiating on your behalf, independently recognizing best practices and challenging whatever vendor you currently have or are looking to have the equation. So that's the point of this slide, is it's not just me. The next slide speaks to the agenda and where we were, where we are, the process moving forward and the timeline moving forward. So, you know, in the where we were category, we'll talk through a little bit in terms of we were self-funded. We had transitioned to quartz, and we've been dealing with January 1 is our contract start date. So every year we're on the calendar year for the contracts that we sign with our respective vendors for benefits. You want to advance to the next slide? And expanding on the where we were type thing, when we did transition from self-funding to fully insured with Quartz, we spent a fair amount of time looking at provider disruption. We spent a fair amount of time looking at all the different options, and Quartz aligned favorably to our staff members' provider alignment. And so there was minimal disruption, and we were able to save $1 million, a little over $1 million to minimize that disruption. We have rate caps, and as you see on the rate caps, you have a second, third, multi-year rate caps. By the way, those days are gone, unfortunately, dealing with the volatility in the health and the provider world and the prescription world. But we benefited from that significantly. Our most the recent renewal for this current calendar year, we did have a 9%. We did tweak the deductibles and the specific outline notes that, in each category, we have 3 plans that are offered. Most all the individuals are in the high deductible plan, the second one, but, the deductible tweak, for example, 1,100 single, 2,200 family on the, one plan design converted to 1,300 single, 2,600 family. And you see subsequent, the other plan design categories, you see the respective plan design changes. To get those, ultimately the rate increased 9% down to a little over 6% in those plans. The one plan design did remain the same, but the summary takeaway, which is the plan where most everyone is in, is currently 3% higher than when we originally transitioned from self-funded to courts. So, I'd say overall, we've been outperforming the norm by a fair amount when you look at it from that, financial standpoint. Where we are, so we are, when we look at, the loss ratios, 95.8%. What does that mean? For every dollar that we are paying in courts, they are seeing 95.8 cents going out in expenditures for healthcare. That's not including administrative costs. So if we use the rule of thumb of about 10% administrative costs that they use toward, paying their staff and paying for their overhead, this would be on the higher end of the expenditures. And the one area that has gone up are ancillary services and prescriptions from the prior year. So these are things we pay attention to that are the cost drivers. Prescriptions are consistent with most all employers of any size. And then the other is the spike in high cost claimants. That tends to be a big driver. And what we notice on members, we look at what percent of the claims do top 10 individuals represent about 17% of overall paid claims. They only represent, less than 1% of the overall membership. And 4 of the top 10 are predicted to have in excess of $100,000. Why is that important? It just speaks to the fact that, okay, the ideal number is under 90% medical loss ratio. And are we going to get some relief because maybe some of the high cost claimants are no longer high cost claimants? And the short answer is not from that category. So,
Just have a quick question. Do you know by chance what some of the high claims are, seeing as we're not getting employee names associations, just to see if there was something like an incentivized wellness program that could help address some of those top claimant related issues?
I don't have that with me. Do we receive that? Yes. And do we constantly revisit what are some strategies? What are some approaches to be proactive to mitigate those from occurring in the first place or reoccurring? Yes. Good question.
What are the typical trends in the high cost category? Are they surgeries? Are they autoimmune? What are they?
The answer is probably the most consistent in terms of category, but various specialty drugs, certainly, when you speak to autoimmune, we'll see that flare up. But beyond that, I'm just trying to think. Maybe the biggest areas that are able to be addressed would be MSK, like musculoskeletal type things. So, back problems. So it's one thing to recognize the large claimants. It's another thing to recognize what can we mitigate. And the areas that we can mitigate include musculoskeletal, behavior health, And when we look at employers as a group of area districts, we look at this throughout the CISO footprint and statewide, then nationwide, look at all the best practices. And, you know, from a preventative standpoint, behavioral health, musculoskeletal, and then after that, just having the preventative screening is just getting that engagement, making as much as possible, challenging the health system to have everyone be age, gender appropriate screenings occurring.
And is this inclusive of physical health as well as mental health from a benefits
The
perspective?
behavior health, yeah,
Okay, Thank you.
absolutely. All right, so after the high cost claimant slide, when we look at where, from a year over year standpoint, year to date claims that are reported and recognized, we compare last year to this year. And what you see is we're actually doing a little bit better in the first couple of months, most recent months. Also same-ish, from a loss ratio standpoint. And as a result, when we look at that, as well as the large cost claimants, that's when we start looking at planning forward. You wanna forward on the slides. We know that we wanna outperform budget, right? So levers that can be pulled in that regard, in addition to our actuaries independent challenging the health plan as well as challenging their pharmaceutical and other approaches, they being courts. We can also use levers that plan design changes are always a consideration, or we can go out to market. We can just let courts know that, hey, you know, if you can't become more aggressive on certain areas that are, I'd say you're not achieving the norm, we can go out to market. And those market options would include both self-funded, fully insured, and we always also look at the ETF, estate plan, and other considerations as well.
So we don't know if we kept courts, like if we kept courts as is. We don't know if it would be within our budget target or not yet.
I would say, we don't know.
Okay,
And I'll
for
talk
sure.
through the rest, we don't know for sure.
Okay,
But based on the fact of how you're running compared to last year, we have a good argument to negotiate that we should be able to be at least where we were last year. And if you recall, that was roughly 9, right around that 9%.
Yep,
I think.
okay, all right, thank you.
So, and we work with the administration as far as best strategy for short-term, long-term solutions, and administration, you know, work with them, bring forward, the administration brings the options forward to the committee that fit the budget target. Margaret, anything
No, and usually we bring those options forward in right around August, right? That's usually our window, and then the plan itself, in terms of whatever action is taken, we bring the options forward in August for review. Decisions are more or less finalized, and then the final approval for that occurs at the October meeting, which is more or less just like a ministerial approval based on what was decided at the August meeting. So it shouldn't, like the October piece of this process should not contain any surprises.
Okay,
this just speaks to, we don't just look at, based on our size, we don't look at insurance like a commodity. In other words, how do we focus on the negotiations with the providers? And this speaks to, if you're a provider, hospital, clinic, whatever, you're looking at this continuum as would we, and seeing, okay, how can we best negotiate as an employer for the best options? And when we were self-funded, we were on more of the left end of the spectrum, fee for service. What does that mean? Every time a staff member that was on the plan had a claim for the respective CPT code or procedure, procedure code, there was a cost associated with it. And over the course of time, every time that procedure, the billing would come, we would reimburse the provider accordingly. And at the end of the year, you add it all up, and based on the contract of fee for service versus capitation, which is we prepay Quartz, who's owned by Aurora, who's owned by UW. We ultimately prepay them a dollar amount, which is scheduled. I'll use UW as an example. Our best self-funded contract that we can access with UW is about 20% higher reimbursement for the same unit cost as what Quartz is able to contract with UW. As a result, when 90% of your premiums are going toward claims, it's real hard to outperform that option. Doesn't mean we can't, just a point of this continuum that we're looking all the time at the different provider contracts, at the different approaches, and ultimately at the different outcomes. The last slide, and I apologize, I went through this quick and certainly take as many questions as you so choose. But this speaks to next review should be able to mid-July get some of the first pricing. And if you're wondering for January through December contract, if you're feeling that July is kind of early in the world of insurance to get numbers, short answer is it is. But the good news is it's a worst case scenario that we get from Quartz in terms of commitment on their pricing for the upcoming year. And that's when administratively can decide, what makes the most sense for the next steps and request for information. If necessary, July 21st would be when we send out that RFI for responses from the different carrier options, the spectrum, with an understanding August is when it would be due. And an understanding that the HR committee in the August 18th date would have the options summarized, and early September, the objective would be to have a decision so that come, in board action as necessary. October is when staff members are educated on what their plan is for the following year. And in November is when they do the actual enrollment. And then the actual contract year takes place January 1st. I know that was a lot. I also know you have a lot in your agenda, so I want it to be as concise as possible.
I don't have any questions for this
Yeah.
time. Thank you for the information.
Yes, thank
I do
you.
appreciate it. Very compact, very clearly explained.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
So we will next see you here in August. And you'll have presentations for us and a better idea of what our options might be at that time.
Right.
Thanks. We'll put you on our calendar.
Yes.
Looking
Thank
forward to it.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
You as well. Take care.
All right, so now we have D, board member responsibilities and personnel matters.
So for this part of the agenda, we had invited Brian Waterman. Do you want to come on up to the table, Brian, and join us to give us the some professional development in these important topics?
Thanks, Margaret. And good to be with everybody tonight. I always say that these kinds of, I don't know what you want to call them, workshops or You know, youth services are my favorite way to interact with boards, you know, so often people are seeing me because there's a tough decision to be made or a problem, so. It's nice to be able to get some time and talk a little bit about, in this case, board responsibilities and board member roles in various personnel issues. And so, I'm gonna talk about a handful of ways that, boards primarily engage in those things. Some of that is, a large topic, is what you guys have on the agenda tonight, which is, setting policy for how various different hiring processes are to go. So that's gonna be an important topic that we talk about later tonight. And I believe you wanted me to stick around for that as well, Margaret?
I think so.
Okay, I'm glad to do that. So I always start, whenever I'm talking about board rules regarding any topic, and this is no exception, I always start with where does the board get its authority from? And the good news is that the board's power, it has broad discretion, right? So under, section 120.12 and 120.13, it talks about various powers and then duties. And the powers are many and pretty broad in a lot of cases, so you have great discretion as a board. The key, though, is that the board is the one with the power. The board or the committee, in some cases, it's been delegated by the board. Individual board members don't have any individual authority by statute. Now, there's some things, you know, some roles such as officers, presidents, treasurer, things like that, that have certain roles. But for the most part, we look to the authority of the board or the committee as a body, as a governing body. And this is reflected in some of your board policy. Tonight, as I talk through some of these issues, I'll reference some of those policies. And I know you guys are in the process of converting to some Neola as well. And they really have similar, on this topic at least, they really have some similar policies. But your board policy 8310, board member authority and responsibilities, is just one I pulled out here that says, while elected as individuals, the board acts collectively to govern the district as informed representatives of the citizenship. Individual members of the board do not possess the powers that reside in the full Board of Education. And that's not just by policy, the policy reflects the statute. That's what the statute says. So something to keep in mind as we go through these, we're really talking about the board and its role. We'll talk a little bit about individual board members and why what best practices are for individual board members as they participate in that process. But that's just kind of the lens we're going to look through a lot of these issues with, is that board power. And again, that board power is very broad. The other topic I like to talk about when I talk about board involvement or board member involvement in various topics is the policy governance model. So your policies reflect what most districts engage in, which is a policy governance model. That means that the board sets the policy and then you hire administration then to carry out those desires that are expressed in the policy. So you conduct oversight of the superintendent, oversight of the various processes, such as the hiring process, through the use of policy. And we'll talk about other areas, again, hiring, discipline, things like that, but really that policy mechanism, where you act as a legislative body, that's really probably the most important role that the board duties play. And the greatest way that you can set those expectations for the administration, because they're always looking for, regardless of the topic, what are our parameters? And they have a lot of discretion to exercise there, so it's helpful when the board has clear policies that set forth those processes that it expects of the superintendent and its administration. So the superintendent acts kind of like a CEO and runs the operations, the districts within those parameters that I just talked about. And that's also that concept, that policy governance model concept, is also reflected in your policies. And just to cite a few, board policy 2200, central administration and supervisory personnel. Those policies like 2210 and 2211 that talk about the role of the superintendent. Even your organizational chart under 2500. If you look at that organizational chart, it has the superintendent answering to the board and the board answering to the electorate, which is how you see most organizational charts for school districts. Whereas then the remainder of the workforce really answers to the superintendent, again, who's carrying out the desires of the board as reflected in policy. Board operational goals under 8110, I can go on, but I think you get the idea. It's also listed under all those board operational goals, code of ethics, and board administrator relations. So you find it really when you talk about the role of the superintendent, but also the role of the board in those board operational policies. And again, that reflects that same concept. So any questions on those first two topics that kind of set the stage for the rest? Okay. So let's talk about hiring a little bit. I think I heard somebody mention earlier that support staff, like at-will employment, is handled by the administration, is that right?
That's how it's currently set up, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'd say that's probably pretty typical, is that those types of hiring arrangements are delegated to the administration. That's not, it doesn't have to be that way, but that is the way most districts do it. With regard to certified staff, so administrators, teachers, that's when the board has direct authority by statute to contract with those individuals. And that's why the board plays such an important role in that process, is because the statutes say that the contract, which is required by certified staff, is with the board. It doesn't just say district, it says the board. And so the board has the ultimate say. Now, by policy, as you guys have been talking about, there's a process involved by which the administration carries out that process and then makes a recommendation to the board. Your policies as they stand now reflect that the board, and again, this is common, but the board couldn't, for instance, go out and just identify its own individual that they want to bring forth for employment regarding certified staff. It's at the recommendation of the administration. So that ensures that there's a process involved, that the administration is doing the legwork, but then they bring it to you. And as mentioned earlier, you have to say yes or no regarding that particular contract, that particular individual. And so again, going back to that policy idea, it's important, and I think it's great that you guys are taking up that issue of, all right, what do we want to see that process look like? Because then that gives the administration clear direction. So we talked about teacher administrative contracts. Those are by statute 11821, 11824, that says those have to be with the board. And there's details about what those contracts look like that I'm sure you're familiar with, the duration of those contracts and such. So there's certain things that we can't address by policy, but most of the process, rather than the substance of those contracts, can be determined by policy by the board. Discipline's the next topic that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So it's important when it comes to most discipline is handled at the administrative level until you get to termination, in which case I'll talk about it in a second, but there's a number of due process rights that involve the board, both pre-termination and post-termination. And those are things that are due process that's granted by contract, that's granted by policy, that's granted by statute in some cases, and certainly by constitutional due process. But I think one of the takeaways here is that it's important, and this is true in a lot of matters, not just in the employment context, but it's important that individual board members honor that policy governance model, because there's a number of things that can go wrong if you don't. And the greatest example I see is I work with about 30 different districts, so I see a lot of what works and what doesn't work on boards. And sometimes when board members, they want to be responsive to their constituency, right? Somebody brings you a complaint or an issue and you want to help them. And some board members will take the approach that, well, it's my opportunity to dig into those issues and find out what's going on so it can help them. But in a lot of cases that backfires. And the reason it backfires is because you ultimately may have a say when that issue reaches you as a member of the board. So a hiring process or a grievance process, or in this case, we're talking about discipline. So if it's a termination, and if you're taking it upon yourself to be the investigator, for instance, and kind of getting in the weeds on some of those issues, no matter how well intentioned, it can actually go to preclude you from participation. So you might be in a spot where you'd be subjecting yourself to claims of bias or prejudgment before it gets to the board for determination, and in which case you might have to recuse yourself. Or if you don't recuse yourself, it might jeopardize the legitimacy or the credibility of the board decision. And so not only is it kind of out of self-interest for you and for the organization, but the other concept is that I always say, how can you best help somebody, a constituent who comes to you with a complaint, whether it's a complaint about a staff member or anything else, is really by getting them in contact with the people who can address that situation. And that's typically the administration. Yeah, great.
In that particular instance where there's a desire or a feeling that a board member should recuse themselves of a particular matter, what does that look like, and how does that come up?
Yeah, good question. So it's up to each individual elected official. So the district can't say to a board member, for instance, you need to recuse yourself. It's a determination. I mean, I'll certainly, they can contact legal counsel and we can talk through that and say, well, is this really a conflict or is it not? You know, is there prejudgment? And sometimes it's just the perception of it. But in a practical sense, you make that decision as an elected official. Because the liability also would be attached to the individual as well. And that can look like different things. Sometimes that's just abstaining from the vote. Sometimes that's abstaining from the discussion. There's not a lot of clear, bright line rules on what it means. And sometimes you can have, you know, like a code of ethics violation or potential code of ethics violation for the Wisconsin statutes or your policy, which echoes it. And other times it's just a perception, right? Sometimes the optics are bad and you say, you know what? I have a prior relationship with this family or outside of this or this employee, they're a friend or an acquaintance of mine. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that process. So I'm going to announce to my fellow board members, I'm abstaining from this discussion or this vote or vote.
So in the event that, you know, a staff member or a parent or constituent brings a concern to you as a board member and you're informed of the situation and you decide then, not decide, but you redirect that particular constituent to the administration to handle the situation. How would that, what does that look like in that particular situation? Because at that point in time, it seems like you have firsthand knowledge of the situation. However, you're not necessarily passing judgment one way or another or bias in any particular direction.
Yeah, I think that's just fine. And I think that's the best practice, what you just described is okay. I may have some knowledge because they came to me. That's natural. Your constituents are gonna come to you and say, you know, hey, I've got this issue with this employee or I've got this issue with my kid. And so it's fine to take in that information, but then as soon as they do, I wouldn't ask a lot more questions. I wouldn't dig. I would say, you know what, this sounds like something that is important and that I want to make sure it gets in the hands of the people who can help you best. So I'm going to put you in contact with Jared or whoever in the administration can help accomplish that. And, you know, and then it's fine if you want to follow up with administration and say, hey, that thing that I sent you, I don't need to know details, but, you know, did it get taken care of? Is it in the works? You know, that kind of thing. That's completely fine.
Okay.
You know, because I never want to tell board members, hey, you can't be responsive to your constituents. That's why they put you there. It's just a matter of getting it to the right person and then making sure that you're not jeopardizing your ability to participate later on.
I have a kind of a follow-up question. And I'm just curious because I actually saw this a while ago. I was looking through the state statutes for something else and I happened upon this bit. It's 118.22 subsection 3. And it says in the history section, it says under subsection 2, a board has the exclusive right to hire and fire a teacher. Due process does not require that the board be an impartial decision maker. And so that's what, can you give me a little bit of context? Because it seems like that's kind of the opposite of what I generally hear.
Yeah, I think it's nuanced. I understand what you're saying and I do agree with that. The idea is that if someone brings a claim later on for wrongful termination, they can't say, well, look, the board that terminated me is, for instance, the same board that's gonna be involved in the grievance process. Or the board that's terminated me is the same one that is aware of a disciplinary issue that I had previously. And it's like, well, that's the nature of the employment relationship. So to some extent, I mean, you want to insulate yourself to the extent you can so that you don't run into due process issues. At the same time, I think if it was challenged legally, and that's best practice. If it was challenged legally, I think you could probably make a really good defense.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, I appreciate it. I've been puzzling over that for like 6 months.
That's a great question. And because sometimes you've seen where, especially pre-Act 10, when unions were more engaged in general, there'd be a challenge to everything the board did to say, well, you're biased. And I think that, you know, that's kind of a response to that to say, well, look, they're the employer. I mean, the board is the one who employs those certified staff. So they're going to make judgments. But I just think it's best on the front end to just not involve yourself in the details so that you can have that fresh and objective picture when it comes to you eventually.
Sure. All right, thanks.
Yeah,
So I have a question.
sure.
So, long time ago, as a parent, we had a problem with a teacher being inappropriate with his students, his female students, right? And not knowing how any of this works as a parent, I called my board member, right? I'm military, so I went up the chain of command, and when I got near the top, no one would call me back, right? So the board members were incredibly unresponsive, lots of sympathetic listening, no action, right? So say someone came to me with that today, right? What is the best response for a board member dealing with that problem?
That's a great question, because I see that too, right? And the answer is if your administration is not being responsive, if you've already taken the steps I just said, and they're not being responsive, then it becomes a board matter. It becomes an oversight of the administration. And so you bring that to the board, you might hold a closed session to say, look, here's a problem that I handed off to administration because that's what I'm supposed to do. They're not responding, they're not handling the issue. Now it becomes an issue of, oversight over the administration.
So there is an action you can take.
Definitely, and that's a great way to point out the fact that, again, you as the individual board member don't have the power to, to hold accountable those who might be dropping the ball. But the board does as a body, and it also helps because oftentimes there's not just one side of the story, right? So you go into closed session to talk about that issue, and you get to hear as well from the whole board does, or the whole committee gets to hear from the administration who says, well, wait, there's a different story here that you may not be understanding, and here's all the steps we've taken, and, then you get both sides, but you do it as a body.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so I think I handled most of the disciplinary issues. Like I said, terminations and grievances are where you're gonna see this. The grievance policy is a little different than most, where it does have, in the cases of termination, a full-blown evidentiary hearing, not just an IHO step. So that's a bit unusual, but that means you're even more involved than you typically would. You do still only review the record under your grievance policy when it comes to more minor discipline, but there are greater due process rights in your grievance procedure than others that involve the board more heavily. So something to keep in mind. Okay, termination, non-renewals and layoffs. So termination, we talked a little bit about that. Certified staff, especially, they have due process from everything from their contracts to statute to constitutional due process. That's why in the event of a termination, they have a hearing before the board, a due process hearing pre-termination. They also then post-termination have access to that grievance procedure. In both cases, you guys are the decision makers as the board. And so that's why, again, it's important to maintain that neutrality until the issue comes to you. Along those lines, I'll say one of the toughest things I always think for a superintendent is how much information on personnel matters do I give my board, knowing that I want to insulate them a bit so that it doesn't jeopardize their ability to participate, but also so that if something's high profile, you're not getting blindsided, right? With reporters or members of the public who say, hey, what's going on here? And you haven't even heard about it. And so I always think that's really one of the tough balancing acts of a superintendent when they say, okay, I need to let my board know about, maybe it's not every discipline that might happen, but things that they know are gonna get some traction or could bubble up, and they want to give you guys a heads up, telling you about that without giving you so much detail that's gonna cause problems for you in the future. The non-renewal process, you guys just went through it, so you have an idea that is also something that's governed by statute. So that's something that you participate in. Again, generally, we look at it as whoever has the hiring authority typically also has the firing authority. So because that contract is between you guys as a board and the employee, the certified employee, that decision has to be made, whether it's termination or non-renewal, that has to be made by you as a board, as a governing body. Layoffs are another issue. I don't know if you guys have faced this. A lot of districts haven't in a long time as they see declining enrollment. In some districts, I've seen a lot of this pop up. Layoffs are something that there's not a lot of direction on as far as what that due process looks like. So generally it's governed by something that any language that might be in your contract addressing it, or any language that might be in your policies. But just know that typically layoffs are viewed as different from your normal termination or even a non-renewal, although the safest bet is to do a layoff as a non-renewal. But again, the board participates in that decision. Why? Because at least with certified staff, you're the ones who hired, so you also have the ability to lay them off. And then finally, the grievance procedure, I talked a little bit about it, but it's another thing to have in mind, as you participate in that type of thing. You don't see a lot of grievance procedures, or I should say grievances go all the way up the procedure so that the board is involved, but just know that it could be, by policy, even if you're switching to the Neola policy, that's the way they have it as well. Although it's a more limited review, of the IHO, the Independent Hearing Officer's decision. But again, the ultimate decision is with the board. So I talked at the outset about those pretty broad powers that you have under the statutes. And it includes a lot of discretion regarding your quasi judicial roles that I described tonight. I mean, and that's really in addition to hiring, those quasi judicial roles of determining, conducting hearings on employment matters, for instance, either pre or post termination, non-renewal, things like that. That's really an essential role that you play, although it doesn't happen. But just know that that is part of your responsibilities. And substantively, when you make those decisions, you do have a lot of discretion. Any other questions on things I covered?
Not for me.
I think so.
Anybody else?
Very good.
And Marty, if you want me to hang around and I can answer questions about processes, you guys.
I think for hiring processes,
Yeah.
I think we had you
Sure.
on deck for that as well.
You-
Okay, so now we're on hiring processes for administrators and certified staff. Okay. So the reason why we're bringing this up in HR is because we do have broad authority per state statute, so we want to start acting inside of our authority. So we're making some adjustments, so we have a little bit more involvement in the hiring process in the district. To hire or non-renew any sort of hiring or firing, we need a majority of the entire board, not a committee, so it has to be 5 or more. Diane had asked that in her email, so I just want to make that clear. So I just have a rough outline of some ideas. Please jump in, rough outline, guys, okay? So for new hires, for the interview process, I was thinking that maybe a representative could be part of the interview process for new hires for certified staff and administrators. Now, I do not know if we want to just be an observer in that, or if we would like to have that representative ask questions on behalf of the board. Because there is an idea of potentially once the district comes with either the finalists for recommendation, or the only recommendation, right? So they either have the finalists, let's say 5 people interviewed and there's 2 people up for the job. The finalists would meet with the entire board. At that point, it could be like a meet and greet, or it could be an actual interview process with the board. That's something that we need to decide as a board in what avenue, what vein we'd like that to happen. So either we'd like a board representative in the interview process to ask questions on behalf of the board during the interview process with administration, or we would just have a board individual there for observation during the administration interview, and then do a board greet and interview with the recommended employee. Go ahead, Craig.
Just a couple of thoughts, and maybe a question to ask the.
Yes.
Or possibly even the board if it gets to that point. I'd be curious to find out what the board might find is more advantageous. For instance, in the 2 particular situations where you're hiring certified staff, and then another situation where you're hiring administration, like building administration, central administration, that sort of thing. Because I think those two areas might look very different in the process. For instance, if we were to hire building administration and central administration, perhaps maybe the board would be more active in the hiring committee situation. So that means maybe you have 2 boards that are sitting on 2 board representatives that are sitting on that committee and able to actively ask questions, participate. Then also having some of those questions pre-screened by legal to make sure that, you know, there's a list of questions that, you know, are,
Well, you know, if you're doing any hiring, right?
right,
They have to be appropriate job related questions, right?
Absolutely.
They have to go around your qualifications, your experience, your skills and abilities. You know, if you could, I actually have some potential questions written down that we would ask them in the interview process, like describe your educational background and goals. Um, what are your core beliefs about how students learn best in your content area, so on and so forth. They just have to be job related. You know, we have to stay away from any discriminatory
well, of course.
questions.
But questions can be phrased in such a way as to ascertain that particular candidate's cultural fit within the district.
Correct, yes. Yes, that is correct. It can be, yes.
I guess a point of clarification, if we were to have board members sitting in on an interview process for a particular certified staff member, does it have to be the same board member consistent for the purpose of an even interview process in order to avoid any potential bias challenge later, if we don't have the same board member as a part of all of the interviews for the same candidate?
I think it'd be good practice to do that. Yeah,
Okay.
that way that person can engage one against the other. And otherwise you get a lot of perspectives of individuals based on various perspectives of the board member participating.
Can I just ask for clarification? I think I missed part of your question. So are you asking for like this, the consistency for the entire process for that particular selection?
Yeah, if we're hiring a science teacher at the
Yeah.
middle school, one board member participates in all interviews for all the science teacher for that role.
Gotcha, okay.
And not that they can't change and another board member does another one, because depending on, and Margaret, I guess my question for you is, on average, and I know it might be different going into the next 2 years, given the potential referendum situation, about how many certified staff are we hiring each year, so that we would know, you know, are we talking 20 interview processes, 30 interview processes
So
across?
right now, this year, which is more or less a low year for us, we're in the 20 to 25.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
Danny, I had a meeting with Jared in reference to the athletic director that
Mhm.
they're proposed to hire.
Okay.
And he agreed to let me sit in on that,
Okay, well, that's good.
and I wanna sit in on that.
That's good. The board needs to decide really if we want to sit in with, certified staff, interviews, or if we just want to sit in with administrative, like principal and up. And then I personally would like any new employee to come and meet the board, whether it's an interview process or just a meet and greet. I would like to get the culture where new employees meet the board. I think that will help foster transparency and, go ahead, Craig.
You made a comment about principal and, I think that perhaps maybe it might make more sense to look at anybody from like a, so to speak, a middle management position and up. So anybody above like a certified staff member and up. So for instance, a coordinating position or, somebody at central office that happens to play a role, for the greater organization, but doesn't particularly hold, an official title of an administrator. Like a dean of students might be one
Okay.
of them.
Okay,
Associate principal is an administrator, but it's below the principal level.
okay.
And then I, kind of bouncing off of Jerry's question before, if we're looking at shrinking the pool of sort of administrative roles that we're sitting in on, Margaret, do you have a rough number for us about how many of those administrative
I
roles?
think administrators, we usually hire, like, in the last few years, like 2 to 4.
Okay, gotcha.
And Tammy, to build on what you said about introducing folks, are you thinking, like, if were to have new certified staff, for instance, that we would meet them before they were on consent agenda or after? And I only ask because I know each year the Chamber of Commerce hosts a new teacher breakfast and things like that, and would that be a good place for the board to, you know, get all the new teachers in the district at the beginning of the school year at once, that we would participate and interact with them there? So just curious as to what some of the thoughts were around that.
I personally like the staff, whomever the certified staff is, to come and meet the board in the board meeting. Not saying I'm opposed to anybody going to the chambers meet and greet the new teachers breakfast by any means. But do we really want to obligate any board members to attend that outside of their already committed to board? Okay, so Dan and then Lori.
I would think we wanna do it before the consent agenda.
Okay, before the consent agenda, Lori.
Yeah, and I think, if you're gonna put the time in, I think it's more important to have an individual, you know, a time where you can focus on individuals. It's easy in the breakfast situation for people to get lost in the shuffle. And I think that you would lose that connection with the people you're trying to connect with.
My question is then, is it an optional engagement because they are not under contract and required at that point to come? And would that have any potential bearing on their employment if they choose not to?
Well, in my mind, as I was like panning this out, it would be part of the hiring process. Like whomever was going to work for the district would understand that part of the hiring process would be coming and meeting the board.
Is that something that we can do, or is that outside of, what's legally allowed for the board to?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't seen that, but there's nothing that prevents you from doing that. Well, you could do it that way, or you could make it an invitation, depends whether or not you consider it to be more of a meet and greet or more of an interview.
I would think that from the way that you're talking about it, and this is where I would fall as well, it would be more of an interview, not totally formal, but it would be on the side of things where it's an interview.
Yes, unless we went the route where it was just going to be a meet and greet because we were going to trust the board members that sit on the interview if that happens. Do you know?
Mhm.
We have to iron all that out, essentially.
Can I just clarify then that if you're interviewing every certified staff candidate, is that at the point that administration has recommended that candidate to you? Or is it at
Yes,
some
yeah.
other point? And then are we required, Brian, to do those interviews in closed session?
You would do those in closed session. Yeah.
Okay.
If they're interviews and it's not just a come meet the board, tell us a little bit about yourself, you know, welcome type of thing, then yeah, you want to do that in closed session.
Tammy, I guess I pictured it as sitting with Margaret and interviewing at one point, rather than having to come back from wherever they live several times. You know, they come for one interview, there's a board member sitting there in that interview process. That's not the way you.
Actually, I didn't know which way the board was wanting to go, so I just prepared notes for both avenues. If we wanted to go in the direction where we do have somebody on behalf of the board sit in on those interviews, and that's what we make it as a board, I'm totally fine with that. But if we decide as a board that, we'd rather have the individuals come and meet the board for their own interview or their own meet and greet, then, you know, there's two avenues the board can decide to take.
What I'm hearing is there are two different options too. Certified, are we doing certified staff, yes or no? And are we just doing at, yes or no?
Yeah, that's one of the things that, thank you, Charity. That's one of the things I wanted to clarify too. Because I totally agree with, and support the idea of having like those deemed as administrative type interviews coming to the board level, and having you have a closed session where you can ask questions and do that. That's reasonable because again, we're talking, you know, less than 10 individuals in any given year for sure, right? That would be that, considered that. If we're talking every certified candidate, meaning every teacher, we're gonna have to figure out how we can stack in some more board meetings because I'm just thinking about the timeline for that process to go through the interviews, right? And then bringing them all to a board meeting. And this time of year, you may have 10 of those lined up for one board meeting. And you know, depending on how many questions you want to ask and what that looks like, that may be quite a bit.
Well, and based on the process that we had at the last board meeting where we were talking about process and we're challenged by the fact that two candidates hadn't come forward for the administrator position. If we have to interview two in individual closed sessions for each of the certified teachers, I think it probably could get overwhelming, and I could be wrong.
No, I agree. That's why I'm just tossing this
Yeah.
about and see how everybody feels about it. Craig?
I'm in general support of, a little bit more of an informal setting, I suppose, for like certified staff, if that's the way that the committee wants to go. I think it's more critical, for like those, certified staff and up positions to have something a little bit more
Robust.
formal, more put together as far as that process is concerned. I think that there's a lot going into certified staff, and I'm not dissatisfied with our certified staff. I think our certified staff and the process that we've had set forth, we do have a very strong and robust, good staff working for us. But I can understand if we want to try to improve upon that process.
So it sounds like everybody's agreed that we should have an interview process for administrators, new administrators.
Yes, I think VP and up is what anything above a certified staff level. Is everybody, I'm comfortable with that.
Could we include the dean of students in that?
Yes.
The dean of students does include with that. Dan, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Anybody not in the committee have any
I think
recommendations?
that would be great. I think that it would be good to also leave the door open for a board member to sit in on the earlier interview processes, both for certified staff and for administrative roles.
Option.
As an option, yeah.
If they so desire, right?
Mhm.
Well, how would that work?
Yeah.
With notice, obviously, right?
Yes.
Not just, we have to have an understanding that we're just not gonna show up interview day like we're sitting in today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think to me, it has to be, again, that one person through that same process. That's a representative, so that we don't have all of a sudden 5 board members want to show up at one interview. And then we're outnumbering the interview panel. As it relates to having the conversation with the employee, because as an employee, I mean, I think if we had potentially 9 board members all want to participate in all of the interviews. It may be a bit overwhelming for the candidates.
I don't think we'll have that problem. I think, but can we somehow word it so it's like, if you're an interested person and you want to do this for this one position. How do you word it that, on the outside chance that we all stampede in there, right? How do you rein that back wording wise?
I'm in general support of what Charity's mentioning for the purpose of having to have a more succinct process in place. Something that is a little bit more, I don't know, structured.
Consistent.
Well, and I was thinking, is it that we look to our HR committee leader and Tammy and then Margaret to say, all right, these are the interview processes that we have forthcoming. These are the open positions that are available, and these are the interview times. Is there a particular board member that would like to participate in this role and in this role? And that way we have, for lack of a better word, a sign-up process that if somebody feels really compelled to participate in that process, then we know who's going to be there, who is going to be able to come back to committee and share with us, perhaps their thoughts, key takeaways and things like that.
I like that idea.
That's a good idea.
But I guess we'd have to be under the standing that if we go sit in a certified, not above certified, but at a certified level, that we're not asking questions at that point, correct? We're just, it's just an observation, right? So we're all on the same page there. Okay.
So you're saying that when Margaret's interviewing certified staff, we'd just be observing?
So can I explain like currently what happens is that my office posts the job and works with the building administrator on what their plans are. And I will say a lot of this is fairly standardized at this point. And then the building administrator provides a set of questions that will be standardized questions that are job related, that are to be used by the interview panel. The building administrator then usually works with like building leadership team members or other interested certified staff that sit on an interview panel at the building level to conduct the interview. And there again, it goes back to what Charity was saying about consistent use of the same panel that are then evaluating the candidates. And then they make a recommendation. I talk about their recommendation with the building administrators, collect all of their supporting documentation, go through their question, their process, their references, their background, their transcript, their licensure, and then we extend a tentative offer for certified staff. So I do not participate in every single interview that goes on, and I mean, that would be a huge, that especially this time of year when you see how many people we have on the consent agenda, which by the way, we have been very successful this year in filling our positions rather quickly. So that was a win for us overall as a district. But that is our process usually for our certified staff. I will say that the process for like those dean and above positions, coordinator positions has varied depending on the individual position. And there certainly has been time in the past where we have had board members that have been interested in sitting on and being active participants in selecting the candidate to be referred to the board or recommended to the board. And that actually has served the district well when that happens, because then the board knows that there was a representative with the board's interest on the panel. Staff know that there was board interest in those positions and that it was a rather robust interview panel that participated in recommending that hire to the board. So, I mean, I think most of us would say that, you know, if somebody is willing to commit to that process, we welcome their participation on interview panels. And we do some of the things that you have been recommending in terms of standardized, you know, questions so that there's consistency and questions that are asked according to good practice and that are legally defensible and help us to get the best person for the job in this particular district, in that particular building. So.
Okay.
I would second, I would echo Margaret's, I guess, statement about what's going on, what has happened in the past. And I know that I, as a board member, got a chance to sit in on one of such interviews, that process, and I appreciated that. I would suggest that if there's a particular area of that particular administrator is going to serve in the district, for instance, like it was HR, or I'm sorry, not HR. I don't want to pick on you, Margaret.
Thank
No,
you.
no. If it was in a particular position like a curriculum coordinator or something of that nature, perhaps maybe then you'd ask somebody from Ed Services as a committee member to sit on that committee. If it's somebody in the financial area of the district, you might want to ask somebody from the fiscal committee to sit on that, you know, as much as feasibly possible.
I think what might work from a process standpoint, and speaking most from the administrator hiring perspective, is that, you know, we bring forward recruitment plan, and it's really up to you, Craig and Tammy, how to decide, do you want that to go to board leadership? Do you want it to go through, HR, but that, a plan of, what happens after we've collected in applicants, then, what are the questions, what is the scheduling and the timeline for pulling in candidates? I mean, with administrators, it's often we have 2 rounds of candidates. We have an initial pool. And there again, there have been, rather large panels of people participating in that and have the opportunity to meet those candidates to help pick the best person. And then that gets narrowed to a smaller pool of finalists, which then are brought back in for interviews, and final selection for a recommendation to the board. So I don't know what process you want in terms of how the recruitment plan should flow to you, Tammy, or if it should flow to the board leadership. I don't know. But I mean, that is something certainly that is doable from our perspective when we have administrator vacancies or those other key support roles, that are beyond the classroom or student services areas.
Absolutely.
So how many people are typically on a panel?
It depends on the position and it depends on, the level of interest among staff, but we do usually have staff that sit in on administrator interviews and are allowed to provide input to the hiring authority. We are always very clear with certified staff that they're providing, input for a recommendation, that it's not like a popular vote or anything like that in terms of final decision. But we've had 10, 12 people involved in interview panels. Sometimes when
Oh, that's.
couple years when we were trying to fill Schurz a few years
Sure.
back, we had practically the whole staff that wanted to participate, and they got a chance to meet the candidates and things like that. So, I mean, our interview process, we try to make open enough that various stakeholders have the opportunity to provide input. Jared has led that type of process. I don't know, Jared, if you have anything else you wanted to say about the process at all?
No, and again, I'm here, trying to seek some clarity to figure out. I love that the board wants to have some more involvement and come alongside administration, especially on like the really important hires of other administrators, and those who do administrative type duties in that regard. I would struggle a lot with trying to figure out how we would have a process that doesn't jam up our processes and timelines for hiring people, if the board were wanting to try to get involved in every hire of a certified teacher. Because I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm struggling with what would that look like, to have a meaningful connection and a timeline that won't have us lose candidates, because other offers may come to them or whatever else. And we want to try to secure those offers, as soon as we can and as soon as possible, and then get them already into the culture of being part of our staff and move that forward to retain that hire. So I'm all ears to hear how the board wants to come along and be part of that process. I love the idea of a board member or two sitting in on the interview team. I'm glad that they have the interest in doing that, and I would love to be part of that team, because it does help. Just like when we started having board members in on the curriculum review process, just hearing from another board member, at least one other board member who's your peer, to say, here's how the process went. Because you guys don't speak in education speak like we do. I mean, you don't, talk like that. And so the ability for you to transition that discussion into a meaningful board discussion is a lot different than administration trying to talk you through that whole process. So that's all I really have to add. I'm just curious as to what level of coming alongside do you want to do, and and how can we help incorporate you into that process?
So right now, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one final thought, and I think this goes along with what Jared just said. I think a good middle ground, for involvement would be that all resumes for, open position applications, would be made available to the board in general, whenever they're submitted. I think that would be helpful. That way you kind of get some insight into who's in the running, and, I think that could simplify and streamline the manner in which the board is involved in that hiring process.
So
Okay,
to
so
clarify, Sam, would that be like all of the like teacher candidates who maybe were the finalists for the position? Once we narrowed it down to the top three or whatever were in the final round interview, might be three, might be eight, depending on how good our pool is. Because if you're asking for all of them, sometimes we can get 20 some applicants just for one position. You multiply that by 20, 30 positions. That's a lot of detail that you guys hire us to go through and deal with. I'm just wondering what level of support you want to help us with there.
Yeah, definitely. So, refresh me on exactly what the hiring process is. My memory is that you initially have a pool of applicants, they apply. You have a very brief initial interview process, and then that goes to the second stage interview process. Is
Not-
that correct?
No,
No.
we first do, we collect the applicants, we review their qualifications, and then at the administrator level, we screen those applicants to rule out those candidates that do not meet the minimum qualifications. Or if it's a really large group of candidates, we will screen out those people who's based on experience level and what our hiring needs are. So then that reduces the candidate pool to a manageable group to interview. We don't interview every single person that applies. And then that group is identified for interview, and those qualifications are shared with the interview panel. Like in making applications available to interview panels, we always do like a briefing on the need for confidentiality and the need not to do their own reference checking and things like that. I don't know, Brian, if you are probably more articulate about the confidentiality requirements associated with handling an applicant pool. So I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add.
It's an important component. So I mean, and it's true, not just of those types of documents, but any documents that board members receive. Just because it might be public record, although references aren't, that wouldn't be subject to an open public records request, but just being conscious of the confidentiality of that and the control of the information flow, so making sure that things don't get forwarded to others and that type of thing. But yeah, I think.
Or that we unknowingly disclose to a current employer that somebody is looking for a job and they haven't told their current employer. And
Yeah, I think as long as it's passive and there's some confidentiality protections, some guardrails there, I don't have an issue with those being shared amongst the board.
Yeah, and so.
I'm just responsible.
And so my thought was that after that initial wave of screening, though, then the remaining applicant resumes, applications would be made available to the board.
This is Brad Clark. I'm on the call. I'm wondering if you'd want to hear from an admin perspective on how we go through the process. I've obviously gone through it many times, the hiring process. So if you have any questions, or if you want me to talk through what happens after Margaret turns it over to us, I'd gladly fill you in. Or if you have any questions about that process, I'm on the call. So if I can help at all, let me know.
Yeah, let's hear it, Brad.
Oh, I'm not sure who that was.
Tammy.
that was Tammy.
Oh, Tammy. Okay. So just so you know, when we get an open position, we go through WeCan, which is the state, set up where they can apply. We review all of their documents, which are many. There's personal statements, there's resumes, there's letters of reference, and sometimes we get, I'd say on average right now, we're getting about 12 to 15 applicants for certified staff positions. We review those, we set up a team. Like, for example, if it's going to be a third grade teacher, those other third grade teachers want to be involved because it's going to fit in with their team. Other teachers like to be involved that way. So we screen the applicants, we come up with professional questions, we run them by Margaret, and then we invite them in. And currently we try to do that process fast because they drop quickly. For example, we'll screen and decide, well, we'd like to interview maybe 6. We have 6 really good candidates we want to interview. We'll probably lose 2 of those 6 because it's so competitive before we even get to that interview process in as short of time as 3 to 4 days. So right now I'm trying to set them up. Maybe I called this position I'm working on right now. I called candidates on Thursday for Tuesday to try to get as many available in as I could and build our team so we can interview quickly. Then we go through, we meet, we review, we go through the applicants together as a team. They all present to me typically their rankings of abilities and who they believe they will take. I take that information and then I make reference checks. Again, I try to do that the same day because if I don't, I'm going to lose them again if it takes me a week to do reference checks. So I try to do that the same day or the next day. And then I turn that information all over to Margaret. Margaret and I discuss who we could make an offer to. Then I'll reach out and let that person know as soon as Margaret says, okay, your process is good. This seems like a good candidate. I want to call them right away and say, hey, you're our person. Please hang on for an offer and ultimate board approval. Like, just know that we want you. You're the best teacher available to us right now, but there's still a process to go through. So it does take time and it's a lot. So I don't know if you have any questions about that process along the way and what that looks like. I'd gladly help.
Questions, anybody?
Yeah, Brad, do you see us possibly getting in the way of your timeline?
You know, if we had a good process for that and I knew who to bring in, and between that Tuesday to Thursday, I could say, hey, here's our interview. You know, we're interviewing Tuesday and now we're going to interview from 8 until 1:30 because I do have 6 candidates coming in this week. You know, that's a pretty big commitment. And bringing in other teaching staff and other people. So if we had a good process for that and we can reach out and make it happen quick,
Well,
Brad, you're kind of breaking up a little. Are you
is
still with us?
key right now.
Can you hear us, Brad? Because you're kind of breaking up.
Okay, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, stay wherever you are right now because we can hear you.
Okay. I said if we had a good process for that, it would be okay, I think, because we have to get them in quick.
so would it be reasonable to ask you to email the chair of the HR committee just for a notice? For what you just said, that, you know, you're gonna be interviewing candidates on this date between these times. And that way, it's kind of like, you know, jumping on a moving train. The chair would then let people know who are interested if they wanted to participate. Would that be reasonable and streamlined?
I personally think we should rope Lynn in. right, cause Lynn usually does all the coordinating. I guess I am not so much concerned with the certified staff, cause my understanding with the room was that we were gonna be somewhat removed from the certified staff, like the ability to sit in interviews, but not actively participate in interviews, correct?
Still need a process that's streamlined. that-
Oh, yes. Yes, so I think that Lynn might be the best contact because she would be readily available during working hours where the committee chair in any committee, you know, might not be available during working hours to get that email out as quickly as it needs to be out to all the board members to see if, you know, Dan wants to sit in to a certified staff interview that's scheduled on Thursday of this week or something like that.
That sounds like.
So can I just clarify my understanding? What you're talking about is that for every interview panel that's set up at this building level for certified staff, you want an email sent out to the board members for anyone that wants to commit to that particular interview panel?
Through Lynn.
Right, yeah, but is that the process then? You want, Lynn would then collect whatever interviews are on deck or being planned for a certain day. And then would send an email to all of you saying, okay, for Tuesday, Webster is hiring a third grade teacher. This is the time and date for these interviews. And RMS is hiring a tech ed person, and this is the time and date for those interviews. And then you as board members would then contact the building administrator to get added to the panel. Is that?
I think it would still all have to be coordinated through Lynn, because is it a first come, first serve? Whomever emails Lynn first is the one that then represents. Is there, like, what's the follow-on process, recognizing we won't always get a long time frame? You know,
And what's the point of sitting in or submitting questions when we're not gonna meet until the last Monday of the month?
Well, I think this is more informational for us, understanding and being part of the process than actually, you know, choosing the candidate at that level.
What will we do with that information, I guess is my point.
That's a great question. And two, part of me logistically says, okay, if you're going to observe, the temptation of administration to come to a board member that have sat there in that meeting to observe and ask them, what did you think? Is gonna be pretty great at that point, just because, hey, well, you're part of the process somewhat. I mean, that can be kind of confusing. I agree with Dan. Are you not going to share that information, or as a board member, are you the type of person that, are we expecting that board member to raise a red flag and say, hey, at the board, meeting, I would like to carve out these potential, candidates for, a potential upcoming closed session? I mean, what is the outcome that we're seeking there? Because if the outcome is that we wanna make sure that we have a better say in that particular process, for certified staff, then okay, I can understand that, but we still have to refine that process by which you would reject a candidate if that were the case. I mean, because that, not to say that you would reject a candidate, but like, if you're gonna raise a red flag to say, hey, listen, we need, this process didn't go the way we wanted it to go, or whatever the case may be, I think we need to go into closed session to discuss that. What does that look like? Well, I'm confused on that because me personally, I think I'd almost rather just leave the certified staff to the administration, cause I think we're coming up the works a little bit. I think more importantly is your administration, that trusting your administration to establish that particular culture in that particular building. If you have the administration that you feel confident in, they're going to do that work and you're going to be more trusting of what they do.
So well,
I think you're just gumming up the situation here, due to the fact that, they have to know almost immediately, because you just heard what Brad said. A lot of times they gotta call them almost immediately to get them hired.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Carl. I agree with Craig. I am comfortable with just having a greater oversight over administrators and leaving certified staff to administration. I'm just bringing all the potential options to the board to see where everybody's temperature is at, essentially.
yeah, and I was under the impression that we didn't have a will to weigh in on the certified staff interview process so much as it would be educational for board members.
Correct.
That's what I got from all of you.
Yes, the only will that I really have is I don't want to lose the ability that should in the future during contract renewal, if we have questions about certified staff, we still have the opportunity to exercise our right to say, you know, I would like to get in a closed session about the renewal of certain certified staff members, right?
That's
Like,
renewal, that's not.
yes, but not new hires,
Right.
right? So I'm okay with the board leaving that solely to administration as it comes to certified staff.
So,
Dan?
Yes, I'm with you on that.
Okay,
And I'm with you on that.
okay.
And then as far as resumes go, would you still like to have all resumes, both certified staff and administrative resumes provided to the board?
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Carl, Dan, what do you think?
Not all.
Yeah, right.
After that initial screening process is what I meant, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not against it. I'm not really for it, but I'm not against it.
Okay, can you expand on why you're not for it?
It's a lot of resumes. We've been adding a lot of responsibilities to our administrators recently. And every time you add something, that means that takes away from something else that they would be doing. So I think, if this is gonna fall on Lynn's shoulders, you know, then we can't keep adding more responsibility onto these people. So,
Okay, fair. Carl?
I agree.
yeah. So that's, you know, I don't know if I'm 60-40 or 50-50, but.
Well,
I
we're the
haven't looked
three,
at any resumes yet,
okay.
and we've hired some pretty good teachers, I believe.
So the committee would recommend not having the resumes sent over then, correct? Because we're the three committee members. And two of the three think that it's not necessary, correct? Okay,
For certified staff.
yes. Margaret, you with us?
Yep,
Okay.
so just to clarify, but you would like that, once of initial screening, you would like it for the admin?
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Okay, so certified staff, we're gonna move away from that and we're gonna go to just admin hiring, admin renewals, that's what we'll go to. Okay, so my brief notes, okay, so when we're hiring admins, we agree that we want a board member in the interview process, correct? Actively engaged in the interview process, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I actually have a question for
Yeah.
Jared, because I was looking in Administrative Guideline 3120A is selection of professional personnel, and one of the things it has in it is a procedure for principal positions, which we could potentially look to modify, and it says if there's an opening, a screening committee consisting of blank board members, blank members of professional staff, blank students, and blank parents shall be selected to participate in the interview process. So are we looking to expand it to that extent? Are we looking to use some of the existing administrative guidelines to provide some definition as to what that administrator interview process could be? Because there's also pre-employment interview questions that are administrative guideline 3120C. So again, some of those things that you were talking about, how you had some sample interview questions and things like that from a pre-screen standpoint. You know, maybe those are things that we can use as part of the evaluation process, but not sure where we're at with the administrative guidelines for Neola.
So, yeah, I was just gonna clarify, those are the Neola ones.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if those, if, I don't know, you know, have we moved to adopt any of those? And if not, you know, they might not be something that we could use or address right now, but might be just good informational material to look at as we're talking about
Yeah,
process.
so just for
Yeah.
clarification, we have not worked on many of the administrative guidelines. We've worked on mostly policy. There were a couple of administrative guidelines that we knew we had to implement right away with the policies. The ones that we knew were going to be accompanying policies, maybe help add more support or layers, kind of like the ones you're talking about there, Charity, we haven't addressed yet. We plan to address those as a committee between now and December, at least on our timeline.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yep, go ahead.
Jared had the best,
Oh, okay.
clarification.
No question then?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so, we're gonna be actively engaged in the final interviews, right? Or in the interview process. And then I was thinking that the whole board would interview the administrators. We'd have a closed session interview process for middle level management in the district.
Kenny, are you envisioning all candidates or a select number?
Like whomever the finalists are, not like the first
Okay.
stage, but just the finalists
Just
would,
wanted to be sure.
yep.
Thank you.
and then, when they're starting in their administrative role, they will start with the 1-year contract, like a probationary period, and after that, we will move to 2-year contracts if they fall outside of that probationary period.
Is that part of statute that, that you were talking about before?
Well,
1 or 2 years. You can't do more than 2 years, although you can do multiple 1-year extensions. So yes.
Yes.
1 year at the initial, for the initial contract would be permissible.
okay,
But for, I guess I'd defer to Margaret on this and Jared. In your experience, are candidates more likely to be interested in a position with a 1-year contract or less likely to be interested in that type of a position?
I would hold that, on average, most school districts do offer a 2-year. There are districts out there who have a 1-year, and when we've chosen to do that, right, it's met a specific need. Sometimes we even say like a 1-year interim position. We did that at Schurz prior to this last year because of the hiring window and how late the hiring window was. And we wanted to make sure that we had a really robust candidate pool. So we offered just an interim contract that, it was a 1-year contract, but we also not only stipulated 1 year, but we laid another layer of stipulation on top of that. That was, to let people know this is only an interim. Like you may be considered, but you'd have to enter the employment pool again, right, and be an applicant all over.
So,
It is sometimes a point of negotiations when we extend an offer to where somebody will say, I'd love to come there, but I'm only coming on a 2-year. And, in certain positions, people have the latitude to negotiate at that level.
sure.
And then the decision would be, do we want that candidate badly enough to go ahead with a 2-year?
Let's just say we come across a rock star administrator and we want to make sure that, they are committed to our district and we're committed to them for a period of time. But yet we realize that, things for the first year aren't gonna exactly be perfect in that building. There's gonna be some disruption when it comes to the changes that has to take place. I feel like maybe a 2-year contract is appropriate for that type of a situation. However, I could see that maybe if the board is comfortable with a 1-year contract for administration starting out, to make it a 1-year renewing contract. And then I don't know, administration is not a renewing contract, is it?
They are.
They are.
Under 11824.
Okay, yeah.
Similar non-renewal provisions of the.
So, right, so at least they have that protection in place that, hey, at the end of 1 year, there's a strong likelihood that the district's gonna move forward and renew my contract.
I'm okay with that, a renewal 1 year, but I do like the probationary period. Especially if you're new to the district, because if you are not a fit for the district, then we both need to wait out the 2-year contract.
I would hesitate the use of probationary only because it automatically would put me as a candidate on my heels that you're expecting me to do something wrong.
I don't know, I've never had an employment that I did not have a long probationary period, like 18 months, and they make it very clear to you, you're in probationary employment right now.
Same here, everywhere.
Can, Mr. Waterman, can we ask you to just kind of talk over the difference in administrative contracts, 1 year versus a 2 year versus a rolling kind of contract, and what those mean and what they look like, and the management points that the board has and administration has in between those periods to make sure that we have control over the issues that we might need to?
Yeah, I mean, different districts do it differently. I will say that you typically see 2-year contracts. That's the norm. There's nothing that prevents you from doing a 1 year. I often see 1 years when it comes renewal time and you're unsure if you want to keep someone around. Sometimes you'll do a 1 year to see, so you're not locking yourself in. Sometimes there's separate extension provisions that are purely contractual, not statutory, in which I'm not a big fan of these. They have really long lead times, but essentially you have to give notice very early or it's going to continue to roll over for another 2 years each year. So that's something that you should be aware of too, is that some of those, and I think Jared, that might be what you're talking about when you talk about rolling, because all of them are subject to non-renewal and those procedures. But some administrator contracts, and I don't know if your standard contract does, but some have them where they roll over and renew prematurely.
No,
You don't?
we
Okay,
don't.
that's good.
No, we don't, and we don't have a 1 year or a 2 year renewal. What we do is in December, right? In general, we say, here's everybody who is at the end of their 2 year. We also want to make you aware that these are the people who are in mid-year or in the middle of their contract. And should you think it's important, or if you think they're doing a good job and you want to give them another year, you can. You can give them a year extension, essentially giving them a 2 year when they still had a year left on that contract. We most recently did that this year because as an administrative committee, we wanted to talk a little bit about what those contracts look like. And there's a stipulation that we need to go over, but that's more for a closed session discussion.
You have discretion as long as you're not going over the 2 year mark.
Okay. Feelings on that, Carl, Dan?
Well, if most districts are giving them a 2 year contract, that I would think that's more attractive than us giving them a 1. And if we want that rock star that Craig's talking about, we want to be competitive with those other districts. And 2 years, like Craig also said, that first year may be getting the teachers on board in that school, and it may not look like it's going to look after that. So I think the 2 year is more appropriate.
Carl?
I don't think there's any rock stars.
So 1 or 2?
I gotta agree with Dan. I think your reasoning's good.
Anybody
I agree with
else
Dan.
would like to add anything?
What do you think, Tammy?
I think that if we're going in the direction where we want to improve everything in this district and performance and everything, that it would be better suited for the district to do a 1 year contract, because if you get a poor fit, they can be exited more quickly, and a better fit potentially hired into the district is my personal opinion.
It's also fiscally responsible to do that, I would say.
Can I just make one
Yes,
point,
please,
too?
go right ahead.
When we think about the non-renewal period, so if you got a contract and you're offering it July 1 to June 30th, the non-renewal requires you to make those decisions in January. So the only one of the issues I see with an initial 1 year period is it's not truly a 1 year probation period. It's really, you're gonna evaluate their performance from the start of school until about December, when you have to decide whether or not you're going to move forward with the non-renewal process. So just something to think about.
Okay, that is, thank you for bringing that.
Total of about 4 months.
Yeah, that's not much.
That makes the 2 year look a whole lot better.
Yeah, it does. Sam?
Yeah.
Charity?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, all right, so then we'll go to the 2 year. This is for new hires, so then, since we're kind of hands off with certified staff, like I said, Margaret, I would still like to exercise the right that if a board member does have an issue with anybody on the consent agenda, they can request a closed meeting to have that discussed. When it comes to, contract renewals for administration, I was thinking that we would set up closed sessions with Jared to discuss the performance and potential growth of those administrators in the district. So he would discuss with us what he is seeing in his administrators. Anybody's thoughts on that? For that, against that?
Did we hire Jared for that reason?
Well, yes, but we need to renew their contract. So Jared would have a closed meeting with us and discuss with us, like, you know, why he's making the recommendation for the renewal, the strengths that he's seeing in that administrator, the potential growth that he might see from that individual moving elsewhere in the district. Thoughts?
And when did you think,
Well, it would need to be before the contract renewal, right?
okay, so every other January or December? Do you think?
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, typically, we have done this in, more of the December timeframe. If there were large concerns or some things that we needed to talk about, we would share those in closed session at HR committee meeting, and then again with the full board at the full board meeting, as we would review those. And then your job is to make a decision. I usually give you the option around December to decide whether or not we want to do those renewals. Statute says we have to have them done in January, but I like to give you guys a long enough runway to have more than one conversation where I'm coming in hot with some information and you guys have to make a decision tonight, or at least in the next week or two. You schedule a special meeting. So we like to really try to have those up in December, give you some discussion points, talk about where people are at, and then have some time for you to ask me questions and maybe even bring back more data. And then in January, if we need to finish those.
Like, nope.
I think, I guess I would ask for some clarification behind that a little bit because,
I don't know. I
You
didn't
might
live
not-
in this house before you left.
you might not be aware of like how that has typically played out in the past, being new on this
I
particular
am
board.
not, yeah.
But in the past, those conversations have sometimes been this is no news is good news type of situation. Are you requesting that perhaps maybe Jared come to the board with more of a like a performance report?
Yes,
To the board at that time?
yes.
Okay. I'd be on board with.
Carl, Dan?
Say it again, what am I?
Like when the contracts come up for administrators, Jared and the board will have a closed session to discuss performance of those administrators as their contracts are coming to be renewed.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody? Charity, Lori, Sam?
Sounds
Input?
good to me.
Sounds good. Would it be the same level that we were talking about being involved with the interview panel? So that same level of administrator and up?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, not certified, like.
So D,
Just a clarification, I think Margaret's thinking on the same line. Technically, as far as state statute is concerned, anybody that's a building administrator on up would be considered for non-renewal in like January.
Okay,
Like a dean of students and a coordinator falls under the general category of a certified staff member for the sake of the statute. So then we would be revisiting those particular individuals in September, I believe.
okay,
Or no, not
So
September,
non-renewal for staff.
April, right?
Yeah, has to be done by April.
April. Just as a point of clarification.
okay. So we'd have two separate meetings then is what you're saying?
Uh,
Kinda, like
Sure.
just the way it would work out,
Yeah.
which is fine.
You have a December meeting and then an April meeting or a March.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, since we went through all of this, does anybody have any questions, concerns about us engaging in the process?
Well, Sam did bring up that point about resumes and we did shut that down. But there could we have an option if we wanted to look at certain resumes? I mean, can we do that now? Would we?
I
without
mean,
having to have them all available?
I'm not opposed to that, but I think consistency is key, right? Like, if we allow us to willy-nilly ask for resumes whenever we want, that does not allow Lynn, if she's the person tasked with getting that information to us, a consistent workflow, right? Then Lori can ping her asking for a resume, I can ping her asking for a resume, where if we decide as a board, we would like to see resumes of finalists going forward, at least Lynn knows that's part of her peer review now. Not waiting for Charity to call and ask for a resume or Craig to call and ask. I think that would hinder Lynn more than help Lynn by making it a selective kind of thing.
It would actually be less work to just have Lynn or to have Margaret make a repository where the resumes are available for viewing. That would be a lot simpler.
Yeah, like a Google Drive.
Exactly, or maybe something a little bit more secure, but yeah, something
Or
equivalent to that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you think, Carl? I mean,
I really don't wanna see them.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't have to look at them, it wouldn't be a requirement, but having them available, I mean, what if you do?
Yes, I understand that. I completely understand that.
Better
Gabby,
to.
you?
Yeah.
I am for having the resumes available. I am for that. If this, it's to the, now Sam, the plan was, like, once the 30 people apply, first round, we're moving forward with 8. You want to see those 8 resumes?
Yeah, not the whole swap,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, my question is, now this is just me kind of playing devil's advocate, would it be best to just see the finalists? Do you have 2 interviews, Margaret, for certified staff, like teachers and stuff, or is it just the initial 8 and you move forward?
It really is dependent on the pool.
I think
So,
anyone who's not.
Like, if we
immediately
have 8 people that come in and there's 2 really great candidates, it might be that we pull those 2 really great candidates in for a second round.
Okay,
In other situations, like what Brad was talking about, where you only have 3 or 4 candidates, then they're not going to pull in for a second round. They might do like observation days,
Okay.
which are kind of courtesy visits or whatever, but not used as part of the decision making. It's more like to persuade the candidate, this is a great place to work. We want
Okay.
you to see what we're all about and things like that.
okay,
But it really does depend on like candidate availability and the quality of the candidates that come through.
okay, so do we want like the wording to be like finalists?
I would say after initial screening, resumes remaining after initial.
Candidates selected for interview.
Okay,
So we're going back now and getting resumes now for certified staff? Cause I know we had talked about no for certified staff, yes for admin, but it's sounding like we might be revisiting the certified staff. And if so, my question would be, how do we feel that this will help us as we approach consent agendas? If we have no other interview materials available to us and only resumes?
Do we have no other interview materials provided by HR? For the consent agenda?
Not typically, no.
So we're just consenting on a bunch of names and
Yeah.
we don't.
On the
Essentially, yes.
recommendation of the administration.
That's not very comfortable.
Mhm.
I mean, if we have to consent, we should have some knowledge of what's going on.
Mhm. I think a resume is a good start for that. The reason that I wouldn't have, because I feel the same way, Lori, the reason I wouldn't have proposed initially that we have additional data from the interview process is because I don't know what it looks like to effectively compile and make easily accessible that interview data. If there is a way to do that simply, I would certainly be for that. I just don't know, and I think the resume is the next best option, and so that's what my thought was.
And again, what are we gonna do with the information that we get from the resumes?
I think you can learn a lot from a resume.
I know, but what would we do?
Oh, the point was, they're asking us to consent to
Right,
the hiring of these people.
I'd like to know who they are.
Can, why are we consenting if we know nothing besides their name?
no, I understand that, I just, looking at the timing of the hiring, that's.
Well, I could see some potential value in also knowing, how many candidates apply for the position. And because if, for instance, you get down to like, there's only 3 candidates too for that position. Does the board then make a decision to say, hey, listen, I'm not sure that we got the
Right,
best qualified candidate. I mean, that's out there, we just wanna extend our, employment opportunity for a longer period of time, till we can get that, but I don't know.
That's why having all of the immediate
Resume.
information, I mean, even before screening, I mean, depending on how hard it is to compile that information, I wouldn't think that it would be that hard. I think that that's the better route, because the more information you have, the less time you have to spend in a meeting asking Margaret, hey, can you remember this thing that happened 3 weeks ago? And like, tell me all about this. And that's not really fair to Margaret, and it's not fair to the people who are sitting in the meeting or watching the meeting. People don't necessarily want meetings to go on for 5 hours. If it's content heavy, if it's substantial, a meeting can go on as long as it needs to. But if a lot of it is rehashing just data acquisition, that's best done ahead of time before the meeting even gets started. So that's my thought on resumes and things like that.
I appreciate it,
So can I ask what the expectation would be for the administrators to be prepared to answer questions about those candidates? Because, I mean, we go through interview panels and there's candidates that we remove from consideration. We deal with the ones that are selected for interview. And are you then expecting to be able to engage the building administrators in conversations related to like who they selected for the interview as opposed to, hey, why didn't you take this person that wasn't what?
Yeah.
Because that we would as a cabinet need to
I would,
look at process.
I would potentially, envision, what Sam's probably asking for as not only maybe a resume, but just a brief summary on why they felt that this is a good recommendation, you know? I don't know if that would suffice.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think that that would be worthwhile. Again, we always want to balance how much work we're giving to administration, because there's certainly a lot of work as is. I do like that idea a lot. But I think that, when we make a decision about something, we should be able to give an answer as to why we made that decision. And so in that regard, at any point, we could say, I want to pull this person or this role from the consent agenda, and I want to have a closed meeting discussion about that. That's within the boundaries of how we currently operate. So from that perspective, I mean, there's always a chance, even as we stand right now, that an administrator might be asked to come in and talk to us about that role. So I would hope that we don't do that very often and that things move smoothly, but I think that providing that information is going to help streamline that process. So I mean, keeping in mind, like, this is what I thought, if I were the administrator being able to articulate, this is why I thought this was the best pick for the position.
Well, at the very least, it checked the verification box, right? As far as a board member is concerned, You wanna verify that the staff has engaged in a process that you feel comfortable with.
Craig, we have 7 of the 8 members here. So if this were to go to the full board, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like we could decide now
Well,
how we feel about that.
you probably want to have the committee make a recommendation to the board. If one way or another.
But I mean, we could kind of get the leading of how the board would vote.
I think you would have to go into a committee of the whole to do that,
It's not a,
or is that something even more?
it's not a board meeting, it's a committee
You
meeting.
know, I understand.
That would be stepping outside of board
Right,
policy
we're-
and maybe outside of statute.
It is specifically indicated in our board policy that that a committee will not be making, those kind of board level decisions. Specifically by the nature of the conversation that exists. By a board member being able to participate in the committee.
Okay, well then, Carl, I am kind of leaning towards, let's do what was recommended in getting those resumes. So I'm changing to side with Tammy. So you're the odd man out. Sorry.
He wants the resumes, let him have them.
Okay.
Okay, so we've moved to resumes for certified staff and above, right? And then we are gonna be more actively involved with administration. I'm sorry, I'm just recapping, guys.
Mhm.
Okay? We're gonna be more actively involved with, middle level management in the district. We will have somebody actively participate in the interview process. And then the administrator will come to the board for a board level interview, closed session interview. Anybody questions, concerns, opposition to that, please share.
No, I think just point of clarification, who would be leading and running the interview process for closed session meetings? Is it you in conjunction with Margaret? Is it Craig as board president? Is it Jared as superintendent? So just so that we know when we go to each of those closed sessions, you know, who will
I
manage
think
that
it-
interview?
I think it would be best, my recommendation would be Craig. The president should be potentially running those.
If it's at the full board meeting, yes.
And I think that's what your recommendation was.
Yes, I would
Okay.
recommend that, Craig. Even if it was a committee meeting, I feel like it would be best that you run it because you are to represent the whole board. Right, so,
Not in a committee meeting.
well, but if we went into a closed session, right, and we made the decision that because it was gonna be an interview of potential staff, we were going to have the board president as the facilitator of those questions or of that meeting
Okay.
for that specific reason.
Then,
At a board meeting.
that might
Not a
have to be, that might be separately agended meeting then.
Okay, it would have to be.
I was gonna
separately-
say that the point of clarification I was gonna ask is, you know, I know that we are only doing this for those mid-level managers, right? So that's principals, assistant principals, coordinators, right? Directors as well, am I hearing?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Even though those happen, not as frequently, like I said, less than probably about a handful a year, maybe more than that on an untypical year. We still need to have a fairly quick turnaround. We can't wait 2 or 3 weeks to the next board meeting to finish our hiring process. You know, from start to end, we want to make sure that we continue that process going. So we're going to have to make sure that we have some flexibility within the board to have special board meetings when it comes to interviewing those people, right? And I'll have to work with, you know, the board president Lynn to set a special meeting, right? We'll agenda it for making sure that we finalize the interview process, much like you would, Craig, when you did the interviews for my position as superintendent, right? And that we have that completed that way. And we will just have to go with as many board members as we can get there to do the final interview process for interviewing.
Okay,
I mean.
And that brings me back to the question that, or the policy that Craig read before. Talking about if the superintendent determines there's an urgent need to fill a position or that another exceptional good cause exists. That the standard practices can be modified in order to get those potential candidates in. And I'm thinking about, for instance, we know that we have multiple administrator positions open at the high school. And a very important time for the administrators to be in place, so thinking about having those special meetings to ensure that we're getting those folks
Yeah.
into the positions.
Okay. We decided on the 2-year contract because of the explanation, which I appreciate you giving that. Other than that, for contract renewals for administrators, us having that session with Jared to go over the performance of, the administrators that we are tasked with renewing. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to the process? Take away from the process, questions, concerns, improvements, anything at all?
You had a lot of my notes already, so. I mean, like, you had anticipated my.
Yeah.
My comment would be, I appreciate the preparation on that. I do.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Very good.
Least I can do. Anybody? Okay, so I think that's the end of this session. Margaret, do you want to go over the notes that you have there for the minutes, just to make sure that we're on the same page?
So, I mean, the minutes will.
Or for like
The
this?
minutes will be a little bit long.
Oh, yeah.
Summarize my understanding of where the discussion landed. One is that resumes for certified staff invited to interview will be made available to all board members. Anybody involving hiring related to a coordinator or above position, the board will have an active, involvement and role in that. The, candidates selected as finalists will come back to the board for an interview via a special board meeting, most likely, and that we're implementing, generally speaking, 2-year contracts for admin renewals. Admin renewals are subject to a closed session discussion with Jared and the board to support the renewal.
Okay,
They capture it. Sounded like it.
yeah, we're good, guys? Okay, so now, we need to go into, do we have to, it's contemplated closed session, so we don't need to go into that, right, Margaret?
We are going.
Oh, we are going into a closed session, okay.
Before we
No,
go, back, we go consent agenda, go back to A and B, we never went to the consent agenda.
Yeah, if everybody's comfortable with doing that, moving back to A and B for the consent agenda and, make a recommendation to move it to the board meeting for approval. I need you guys to like.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
With the understanding that here on forward, that, because understand that the consent agenda that is tonight didn't fall in line with your new
Process,
your,
yeah.
your new process.
Which will be approved potentially at the end of this month.
Correct. Yeah.
Then I'm being able to go with this.
That's correct.
Okay, so guys, I'll first close session.
So what you would do is you would, entertain a motion to enter into a closed session.
Okay,
I know we go into closed session.
Second,
okay. And that's at 7:48.
And then you would take a roll call vote of your committee members.
Oh, okay, sorry, guys. All right, Carl,
yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Tammy, yes.
Very important. And the motion carries. We're now into closed session, and before we start any other discussion, you might want to allow for Margaret to stop
Yes,
the
of course.
recording.
I'm just gonna run to,
Need to,
Remove certain individuals out of the.
I need to.
I'm gonna.
Hey, I want to thank Brian. Brian, thanks for coming tonight. I think we're at the end of our need. And I really appreciate you showing up.
Yeah,
Of course.
thanks very.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thanks for all your time, man. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Take care.
Brian,
All right,
waiting
so,
for- No, I'm not, okay. No.
Okay,
the next meeting date is Monday, July 21st, 2025.
right.
And,
Action items.
yes, I'm sorry, action items.
So I have for action items. One, I'll be setting up a USI meeting in August with the various options for plan renewal. I will do a summary of the actions from our discussion regarding the hiring processes, as I had summarized earlier. I will follow up with Jared regarding the personnel matter we discussed, and then Jared and I will also be following up regarding the other closed session item with respect to contracts.
Okay, and then on the future meeting planning,
Future meeting planning, there are two documents. One
Okay.
is the 24-25 cycle, which we just completed. And then there's a draft of 25-26, and yes, I noticed I need to correct the top of the year. But we'll start with July 25 and it'll go through June of 2026, along with some various and sundry topics that have come up in HR committee meetings in the past. This is a fluid and working document, and I would expect by the time that we get done in June next year, we will have numerous other topics that will be built into this. And I typically, how I've worked with this document is that the chair of the committee gets suggestions or recommendations from committee and or other board members in terms of topics to discuss, and then I just add them in, and then you can just let me know what to add in. Or sometimes we will have something, the administration will have something that we want to plug in for a certain month. And then I will let you know when we're doing our planning for agenda meetings, but you would be the board contact. I'll work on the
Okay.
admin side, and then that's how we would build this. So none of it is set in stone. It's very fluid, especially as it comes to things like negotiations planning, which is dependent on all sorts of different funding and decisions at the legislative level and things like that. But it's just like a starting point for next year. And there are some things that come up every month, like consent agenda.
yeah, can I add to the next month's
Sure,
future
sure.
agenda already to get a bit more information on the contract for administrators? And like maybe compare and contrast, like what the administration will be losing once all those grandfathered people are gone?
Okay. So we might have to go into close.
So
for
that
Go
would
ahead.
definitely be a closed session item.
Yes. So, okay. So those are the action items that I have. Did I get them all?
I believe so, yes, right? All right, so a motion to adjourn?
Uh.
No, we're not yet.
Yeah, I guess.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Eight.
Do voice acclamation.
Okay, so 8:54 on my thing here, so 8:55, 8:54, it doesn't,
Okay.
is adjourn.
How come you have 8:54 and mine has 8:55?
It just switched to
Okay, I was gonna
8:55.
say, we're not on the same time.
8:54.
Okay,
Okay.
and then Margaret, would you mind giving this to Lynn? I have the roll call on here and stuff from the.
Good night,
open-
everyone. Good
Thanks,
seeing you.
Sarah. You have a good evening.
I will.